The story of The Merchant of Venice supports the human experience through a fairy tale plot, considers the possible intention of Portia's father with leaving his will, explores her different suitors according to the implications of their various speeches, and considers the character range of the play's villain, Shylock. As a fairy tale, The Merchant of Venice has the princess proverbially locked in a box until her Prince Charming comes to release her from the spell. In Belmont is a lady richly left, and not only is Portia rich, but she is beautiful, virtuous, and eminently desirable on all counts. But according to her late father's will, she can only be wooed by lottery. Her suitors must choose between 3 caskets of gold, silver, and lead, which contains her picture. It is a pretty stiff lottery. The contestants must swear not only to abide by the results of their choice, but if they lose, never to woo a woman in any way of marriage again. Choose the right box and you win the princess and the fortune. Choose the wrong box and you go forever without love. From Bassanio's point of view, this story is about outrageous wish fulfillment. He's a spendthrift. He's deeply in debt and persuades his friend Antonio to float him one more loan, with which he buys elegant clothes and gifts and anything else he needs to win the lady, who turns out to not only be rich and virtuous and beautiful, but she is madly in love with him. And on top of all that, after winning the lady, he never has to repay his friend for the loan, because the old Scrooge from whom they got the money is proved to be so villainous he doesn't deserve to have his ducats repaid. The other plot may seem more real. The casket story happens in Belmont, a fairy tale place of love and music, which may have been Portia's estate outside of Venice. Most of the play happens in Venice, a powerful commercial society well known to many Elizabethans. Antonio is prosecuted for a large unpaid debt, imprisoned, brought to trial, and to the point of death. But at the heart of this plot, too, there is a fairy tale motif, although it's grim. The loan comes with the collateral of a pound of the borrower's flesh and includes additional probabilities. Antonio loses all his ships at sea, which is why the debt cannot be repaid, and then he gets them all back again. Portia and her maid Nerissa go to Venice and appear in open court disguised as men, and nobody knows the reality beneath the disguise, even though their husbands are present in the courtroom. William Shakespeare was fond of fairy tales, and he exploited them frequently and used their contrived plots to illustrate genuine human traits through the unrealistic manner. As an art form, his narratives should not be classified as realism. Realism is one of the many techniques that art uses and was common among the late 19th and 20th century artists. Some novelists and playwrights followed this style, but it is not a favored technique in Asian art or African or most medieval art or modern painting. Shakespeare is occasionally realistic, as his works occasionally imitate the surfaces of real life. He will write a scene in prose for characters in a casual relaxation, but realism in that sense is not a principal technique of Shakespeare's time either, and its characters are not novelistic depictions of real people. They are constructs, caricatures. Kings of England do not deliver speeches from the throne in blank verse. His characters are embodiments of insight into the human condition. Even the plot transcriptions are not ordered according to real events, even when they are based on history, but are developed in an artistic arrangement in order to reveal truths about human behavior. This is the point of the caskets left by Portia's father. In real life, fathers do not leave their daughters to be subjected to a lottery system in order to find them their husbands, but fathers and mothers do care about the character of the young men who come courting their daughters, and often try to find out in one way or another what the guy is really like. Is he interested in the daughter or only in the fortune? This is the inner concern of the casket story and the motivation for Nerissa's conversation with Portia in the first act. Your father was ever virtuous, and holy men at their death have good inspirations. Therefore the lottery that he hath devised in these 3 chests of gold, silver, and lead, whereof who chooses his meaning chooses you, will no doubt never be chosen by any rightly but one who shall rightly love. But what warmth is there in your affection towards any of these princely suitors that are already come? The right chooser will be the right lover. So who are the choosers? The Prince of Morocco is a man of great reputation, and proud of his military exploits. By this scimitar that slew the Sophian Persian prince, that won 3 fields of Sultan Suleiman, I would outstare the sternest eyes that look, outbrave the heart most daring on the earth, pluck the young sucking cubs from the she-bear, yea, mock the lion whom he roars for prey, to win thee, lady. This is the heroic man, the man of hyperbole and overstated embellishment. His rhetoric will not win Portia's hand. In fact, the warrior's boast may be too much for her. But his rhetoric followed the style invented 9 years earlier by Shakespeare's contemporary Christopher Marlowe to dramatize the story of Tamburlaine. Tamburlaine is an eastern conqueror with 7-league boots, who crushes kingdoms with every stride and flattens tongues with every speech. Marlowe's success with Tamburlaine was well recognized, and for a few years afterwards practically every playwright in London wrote a Tamburlaine-type play attempting to cash in on the mode's popularity. But by the mid-1590s, when Shakespeare wrote The Merchant of Venice, the Tamburlaine rhetoric had come to seem simple-minded and outdated. When Shakespeare uses it, it marks the limitations of a character rather than working to give the character strength, and it's this boastful pride which causes the Prince of Morocco to make his choice of casket. Morocco is conscious of his worldly character and reputation. On the golden casket it is written, "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire." And Morocco responds, "Why, that's the lady." This is exciting and ravishing, but in fact it's a reflection of one of Tamburlaine's speeches about how he's going to entertain the woman he loves, the divine Zenocrate, the daughter of an Egyptian king, who will become his wife. But besides their enthusiasm, the words on the golden casket have their implication. From the 4 corners of the earth they come to view Portia. They cross land, seas, sandy earth to do so. Portia is desirable to Morocco because everybody else desires her. She is what men want. Therefore, I want her, and therefore I'll gain her. But love, of course, is not simply a matter of seizing what you want. The second suitor, the Prince of Aragon, is a subtler man. He understands the temptation of gold and rejects it. Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire. What many men desire. Obviously, he's a snob. He's arrogant. He places a high value on himself and his own position in contrast with others, and this is the way he chooses. He reads the label on the silver casket. Who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves, and well said too. For who shall go about to cozen fortune and be honorable without the stamp of merit? Let none presume to wear an undeserved dignity. Oh, that estates, degrees, and offices were not derived corruptly, and that clear honor were purchased by the merit of the wearer. And what he finds inside is the picture of a blinking idiot. Some readers have thought that there is something modest in Aragon. He'll take no more than he deserves. But Shakespeare finds desert to be a questionable notion. We are all faulty in various ways. Portia, in her famous speech on mercy later in the play, observes that in the course of justice none of us should see salvation. We are all damned unless God gives us grace. Hamlet says the same thing in a snappier way when Polonius tells Hamlet he will look after the traveling players according to their desert. Hamlet suddenly has a temper tantrum. God's bargain, man, much better. Use every man after his desert, and who would escape the whipping? We all deserve to be thrashed. The claim desert is very risky, especially in love. A genuine lover is delighted when the object of his love returns his affection. We are humble in love. It is a surprise to discover that the person we find wonderful feels the same way about us. Indeed, neither Morocco nor Aragon is really thinking about Portia at all. Essentially, they choose themselves. Morocco chooses his own desire, Aragon his own desert. Bassanio, on the other hand, understands that love is not just desire and is not desert at all. It involves looking beyond oneself and beyond the surface of other things to a reality which requires commitment. Shakespeare creates the character of Bassanio to win Portia, but first Bassanio has to confront a difficulty. Portia is the protagonist of the play, the leading character, and that makes Bassanio the hero. But the nature of the plot does not allow him to be very heroic. The story demands that his friend Antonio pledge a pound of flesh for his sake, and that puts Antonio in a position of risky heroism and lets Bassanio rest as the passive recipient of favors. How could he be an admirable man and the one whom Portia should rightly love? This problem is a special case of a reoccurring trouble that happens in high comedy. High comedy is the realm of wit, of grace, of civilization, and chiefly has been the realm of women. The values of wit and grace and civilized behavior are very well expressed on stage by women. Peter Sacchio explains that men can be witty and graceful, but in Western convention, men have been thought heroic when they go out and do something that calls for strength and courage, and high comedy doesn't allow much room for that. This is the case with Shakespeare's romantic comedies. They celebrate the values of intelligence and courtesy and love, and Shakespeare gives the leading parts to the women, Portia, Rosalind, Viola, Helena, despite the fact that in his theater that means loading the weight of the play on the boy actor instead of giving it to Burbage, the leading actor of the company who plays Hamlet and Lear and any king written. In the histories and tragedies, the lead is always a man. Two women manage to get equal billing, Juliet with Romeo and Cleopatra with Antony, but they never take the lead. In the comedies, As You Like It and Twelfth Night, The Merchant of Venice, All's Well That Ends Well, the female lead must carry the play. This problem in dramatic strategy was solved in part by Shakespeare when he wrote As You Like It. As in that play, Orlando wins a wrestling match in the first act, and later he rescues his brother's wife from a lioness in the fourth act, off stage, so Rosalind can dominate the rest of the play. Some critics believe that Shakespeare never solves this problem with Bassanio, and some accuse Bassanio of simply being a fortune hunter. He wants and needs Portia's money to pay his debts. While it's quite true that he needs the money, this isn't the only truth of his character. The first point he makes about Portia is that in Belmont there is a lady richly left. But he goes on, and she is fair, and fairer of that word, of wondrous virtues. She is rich and beautiful and good. With this list, Bassanio is developing an incremental progression. To call him merely a fortune hunter overlooks how Shakespeare writes about him and ignores what he does when choosing the leaden casket. Shakespeare writes about him as if he were on a romantic quest, a knight errant out of an ancient legend, pursuing a glamorous goal. He is compared to the Greek hero Jason, leading the Argonauts in search of the Golden Fleece. Portia's sunny locks hang on her temples like many Jasons come in quest of her. The Jason reference reoccurs several times in the play. When Bassanio has chosen rightly, his friend Graziano states, "We are the Jasons. We have won the fleece." And Portia goes a step higher when she compares Bassanio to the greatest of the Greek heroes, Hercules. In her comparison, Portia is the unfortunate maiden princess left to be devoured by a monster, and Bassanio is the Hercules who comes along to rescue her. Portia says, "Now he goes with no less presence, but with much more love than the young Alcides," another name for Hercules, "when he did redeem the virgin tribute paid by howling Troy to the sea monster. I stand for sacrifice. The rest aloof are the Dardanian wives with bleared visages come forth to view the issue of the exploit. Go, Hercules, live thou. I live with much more dismay. I view the fight than thou that makest the fray." In Portia's speech there's some basis for the extreme comparison. Portia is tied to the casket. Her life is buried in it. And all the suitors who have come along so far, Morocco and Aragon and 6 others whom we don't see but are described by Portia, are undesirable people. Portia is a rich woman in a patriarchal society, without much opportunity for choice or voice, and she suffers the vulnerability as well as the popularity of an heiress. She lives in fear that one of her suitors just might stumble onto the right casket. By poetry, Shakespeare makes Bassanio something of a valiant quester, rescuing a virgin in trouble. But the real heroism of Bassanio lies in the choice itself, and is preceded by a song. Songs in Shakespeare's writing are usually addressed to the audience. They make a thematic statement about a value that is important to the immediate action. In this case, the song tells us that there is a mystery about love. Fancy is easily explained as mere attraction or sexual desire. The British still use the word in this sense when they say, "Do you fancy her?" Or in other words, they're asking, "Do you want to go to bed with her?" Fancy is based merely on appearance. It begins with a look and grows with a gaze towards something beautiful, and when the beauty fades, it dies. The implication is that love, based not on appearance, is something more than pleasing to the eyes. It is based on character qualities and cannot be explained as a mere mechanism of desire. It's easy to see why someone with movie star looks can inspire lust, but no one can explain why someone falls in love with a particular person. Love involves discontinuity and some kind of leap beyond the external qualities to some inner reality. Implicitly, this embedded song asks whether Bassanio is merely a fancier like the other suitors, or a true lover. Bassanio responds to the test with a meditation explicitly distinguishing between the reality of true love and the false charms of appearance. So may the outward shows be least themselves. The world is still deceived with ornament. In law, what please so tainted and corrupt, but being seasoned with a gracious voice, obscures the show of evil. In religion, What damned error, but some sober brow will bless it and approve it with a text, hiding the grossness with fair ornament. There is no vice so simple but assumes some mark of virtue on its outward parts. How many cowards, whose hearts are all as false as stairs of sand, wear upon their chins the beards of Hercules and frowning Mars, who inward searched have livers white as milk. And on that basis he rejects the appeal of the gold and the silver caskets and chooses the uninviting lead, which rather threatenest than dost promise aught. Thy paleness moves me more than eloquence, and here choose I. Joy be the consequence. He realizes that love is beyond mere appearance, and he rejects it. He understands that love is about more than mere desire. In love you have to leap. In fact, the nature of the leap is specified in the casket labels. Gold says, "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire." But love is not mere desire or chasing after the hormones. The silver casket states, "Who chooses me shall get as much as he deserves." But love is not merited desert. It is bestowed. The lead casket says, "Who chooseth me must give and hazard all he hath." In love, you give yourself and commit all you have, and in this era it should still be a commitment made without the choice of a quick divorce. Bassanio is willing to make that commitment. He has the generosity to give himself, and it's true he will gain Portia and her money, but the strength of his character lies in the fact that he doesn't take Portia and her fortune in any way that would validate the charge that he is a fortune hunter. In this scene of choice he performs an admirable and generous act. The little verse that he finds on the lead casket tells him, "Turn you where your lady is and claim her with a loving kiss." But he doesn't claim her, and he refuses to arbitrarily kiss Portia as if he has won the prize. He does the opposite of claiming her. He gives the choice back to her. "Fair lady, by your leave, I come by note, to give and to receive, like one of two contending in a prize, that thinks he hath done well in people's eyes, hearing applause and universal shout, giddy in spirit, still gazing in a doubt whether these pearls of praise be his or no. So thrice, fair lady, stand I even so, as doubtful whether what I see be true, until confirmed, signed, ratified by you." And with this statement he gives the choice back to Portia. The casket has told him that he has won, but he's not claiming the right of victory when he leaves it up to her. Through her father's will, Portia is bound to the casket, but Bassanio's response is extraordinarily perceptive. He has freed the heiress from the lottery and then left her free. If she doesn't make the next move toward accepting him as her knight, he'll gather his things and go home. That is giving and hazarding all you have and all you have won. Giving the one you love, her or his own choice, is the significance of these unrealistic caskets, and completes this part of the fairy tale as the beautiful princess is rescued valiantly and restored to life. But if there is a princess and a hero, the fairy tale also needs a villain, and for the Merchant of Venice, the villain is Shylock, a cruel and vengeful usurer, who plots the death of a good man, and in his request of a pound of flesh. His character is built around a tripartite stereotype which had its roots in historical circumstances and sharply contrasts with the generosity of Antonio, Portia, and Bassanio. In fact, Portia recites the Christian view of mercy in her great speech of Act 4. "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives, and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest, it becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute of God himself. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. In the last act, Lorenzo speaks of the stars moving in their orbit when he acknowledges, "Look how the floor of heaven is thick inlaid with patines of bright gold. There's not the smallest orb which thou beholdst, but in his motion like an angel sings, still choiring to the young-eyed cherubims. Such harmony is in immortal souls." That is the harmony of love that created and sustained the universe. All this Gentile generosity stands in opposition to Shylock, who rather than thrives in a spirit of endowment tends to shut things. He requires a pound of flesh. He ties up his assets in business ventures, shuts his door to merriment, and even locks it to prevent the music from seeping in. In the trial scene he craves not mercy but the law. All these actions go with the basic formula of the character, a three-part stereotype. He is a miser. He hoards his money. But he is also a usurer. Money lending at interest was officially condemned but tolerated as a necessary evil. It is an unnatural form of reproduction, but necessary to keep the economy going. The Parliamentary Act of 1571 condemned money lending as a mortal sin, and then made it legal so long as you didn't charge more than 10%. However, Shylock is also a Jew, and it was acceptable for Jews to be in the money-lending business, as they were labeled as sinners according to the fact that they were already condemned by not being Christian. Shakespeare's England, dominated by the controlling Christian faith, negatively defined the Jew. To be a Jew was to be not a Christian, one who rejected the dispensation of love, mercy, and salvation that Christianity says is available through Jesus Christ. It is an alien and not part of the Christian community of love. He lives under what St. Paul called the old law, the law of strict justice, an eye for an eye, and thereby thought of as the other, or as someone outside of the social circle. In this play, Shylock is also the scapegoat, as Christians have difficulty living up to the ideas and standards set before them. According to Goddard, the Christians project on him what they have dismissed from their own conscience as too disturbing. They hate him because he reminds them of their own unconfessed evil qualities. The clearest example is that of Gazanio, as at the end of the trial scene he exhibits a vengeance equal to Shylock's. Shylock embodies those aspects of Christian society which fail to be fully Christian, and he's punished for it. He is a stock figure, a stereotype, and according to Nicole, his religious attitude is legalistic, obdurate, revengeful. In England, the stereotype had a special purity. The Jews dominated finance and were a major source of crown revenue and exempt from regular taxes, and lived in the household of the king, the exchequer of the Jews. The belief in the blood libel, that Jews killed Christian children in order to use their blood in the unleavened bread of Passover, was said to first occur in England in the town of Norwich, but similar murders were to have occurred throughout Europe. The Jewish fable was that Jews lured little children into their clutches, murdered them, and took their blood to make bread for Passover. And Jews poisoned wells and were responsible for the bubonic plague, among other things. Of course, these were anti-Semitic rumors that helped ban Jews from England between 1290 and 1660s. Nearly 4 centuries later, or 40 years after William Shakespeare's death, were practicing Jews readmitted to England. According to Greenblatt, London had a small population of Spanish and Portuguese converts from Judaism, and some of these may have been secretly maintaining Jewish practices. But the Jewish community in England had long vanished, and there were no Jews who openly practiced their religion. With this history in mind, it is possible to conclude that at the presentation of this play, no real people could be damaged by English anti-Semitism, since few Jews lived in England during Shakespeare's time, and the myth of the Jewish usurer could flourish. In fact, in Marlowe's The Jew of Malta, the Jew is a villainous character who poisons wells, blows up a barrack of soldiers, kills under the pretense of administering medicine, and murders a whole convent of nuns. For Shakespeare, the stereotype serves as a blueprint for the characterization, and the character is more than the labels of dehumanization some critics impose on Shylock in this play. Considering the history of interpreting the role of Shylock, various facets of the character have been brought to the stage, and these interpretations generally reflected the attitudes society held towards Jews of their eras. The first actor in the part, in 1596, was Richard Burbage. While we don't know how he played the character for William Shakespeare, there is an explanation of Burbage's physical interpretation published about 50 years after he and Shakespeare died. In the account, Burbage is described as having a red beard. His face was made not much unlike a witch's. His habit was a Jewish gown, his chin turned up, his nose turned down, and both ends met together. This is a comic character to be laughed at, a stock character. And by the late 17th century, Shylock was a comic villain. In the 18th century, Charles Macklin made Shylock a serious villain, and memoirs record that he gave full vent to the contrast of the part and gave it a frightening malice. His interpretation made it no longer funny, only very villainous. In the Romantic era, Edmund Kean played him as an honest villain with family love and racial pride. It was recorded that Kean played Shylock as an honest in his vices, and the Christians were hypocrites in their virtues. Praising the villain for being direct and open at the expense of the virtuous, who often fail in their virtue, demonstrates a social shift in feeling. In this, the greater sin appears to be hypocrisy. In the Victorian period, Henry Irving made him a heroic patriarch, marked by dignity and heroic pride. His character of Shylock carried all the destiny of the Jews as the chosen people, and Henry Irving was the first actor in England to be given a knighthood for his services to the theatre. In 1970, Shylock was a banker, aristocrat of the industrial age as played by Laurence Olivier, the first English actor in the history of the theatre to be made a lord. In this role, Olivier took great risks, and his memoirs record that it was for this character that he truly experienced stage fright. Peter Sacchio watched him perform the role and acknowledges that at the end of the last act, Jessica, left alone on stage, clearly regretted her choice to leave her father for the Christians, and a Kaddish was chanted off stage. Jews chant the Kaddish to signify death, and it was explained to Sacchio that sometimes that death is when a child leaves the Jewish faith at marriage. The play ended in death. Sacchio felt that this interpretation of the character did the play an injustice, as the Kaddish kills the question of what does happen to Shylock after he loses and is forced to turn Christian. Perhaps in response to Christopher Marlowe's The Jew of Malta, which is intensely built on stereotypes, Shakespeare moves the character of Shylock beyond the stereotype with his famous speech of Act 3, Scene 1. I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, do we not revenge? If we are like you and the rest, we will resemble you in that. While there are many ways to play this character of Shakespeare's, the choices made by these actors are justified according to information Shakespeare writes into the script. Shakespeare's rich imagination produced a Shylock who fulfills the stereotype and also tells us what it's like to be inside the stereotype. Victor Hugo states, Shylock is the Jewish bargaining. He is also Judaism. He sums up a whole race, such as opposition has made it, that Shylock is great. The fruit contains the mystery of the tree, and the type contains the mystery of the man. At the point of Shylock's most famous speech, he has just found out that he has lost his daughter and his ducats, and that Antonio has lost most of his money and cannot repay the loan. Shylock plans to extract the collateral, the pound of flesh. Antonio's friends object, and Shylock responds, "To bait fish withal. If it feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge." This could be described as a villainous speech, as whatever Antonio has done to Shylock, it has not done him any mortal injury. So to respond with a plot of death is overkill. It's both a cruel piece of exaggerated and vengeful illogic and an overwhelming outpouring of painful feeling. Revenge is not an automatic physiological reaction as bleeding is when pricked or laughing is when tickled, but it's a chosen response. Humanity gives us choices. Shylock's speech draws us into his humanity and the range of emotions, but then appalls us with his conclusion. The speech is also an accusation. Shylock points out that Jews resemble Christians both in their humanity and, at times, in their inhumanity. Shylock is part of us all. If we hold ourselves aloof from this revengeful man, we do not know ourselves. If he is strange, outrageous, and variable, so are we. None of us can live up to the law. We all need mercy, forgiveness, and grace. Portia remarks, in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. At the end of the play, Shylock is pushed into becoming a Christian, and in the design within, Faber offers an explanation. He suggests that cutting the pound of flesh is to the Gentile a symbolic gesture of the Jewish religious rite of circumcision. In other words, to pay back the 3,000 ducats at the fixed time, Antonio should submit to the Jewish religious rite of circumcision. Thereby, at the end of this play, when Antonio demands that Shylock should presently become a Christian, it is poetic justice and responds to the law which demands an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Shakespeare took the stereotypes of common life and the allegorical frameworks of the old medieval drama and filled their abstract patterns with flesh or feeling. Shakespeare is a great psychologist, wrote Goethe, and whatever can be known of the heart of man may be found in his plays, Goddard tells us. Shakespeare's characters are true to the inner realities of our lives and explore the urges and energies of human beings, the forces within our psyches. This is the abundance of Shakespeare.